Well, hello, avid readers. Trisha Goyer here, and I have a book that you are going to love. But first, let me introduce you to the author. So I have Carrie Turansky here, and we are talking about her book, A Token of Love. But before we talk about the book, Carrie, why don't we just spend a minute and you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Well, thank you for having me here today, Trisha. It's fun to connect with you and also to
Yeah.
connect with reading friends. And let's see, I live in New Jersey. I'm married to Scott, who's a pastor, and he's also an author of parenting books and goes around the country and speaks to families. And we have 5 adult children, and we have 11 grandchildren, and one more on the way in about 2 weeks. So that takes a
Ooh.
big place in my heart is family. But I also love our church. I'm real involved with the women's ministry there, and I like gardening and cooking healthy food for family and friends, or walking around the lake that we live in New Jersey, which sounds like, such a busy place, but we live in a really pretty suburban area by a park that has a big lake. So I like to go for walks around there when I can. So that's a little about me.
And you write books on the side, just in
Yeah.
addition to all this. How many books do you have published now?
I think this is my 23rd.
23rd. I love it. That is so cool. And I've interviewed your husband before just for my
Yeah.
regular podcast. So it's fun just to connect with both of you. But the new book we're talking about is A Token of Love. And it's dual time, which there's a part of a past story and then a present day story. And they're all tied together kind of by the theme of these tokens. So why don't you just explain a little bit, like if you're giving us the elevator pitch or just explain what the book is about. And then we're going to go
Sure.
more into details because I love this type of story. It is literally my favorite type of book to read.
Okay, so I just got my copy this week, so that was
It's so
exciting.
beautiful.
Yeah, it's coming out September 3rd. So this will probably be released the podcast after that, but we're excited because it's just a
Yeah.
week away from today. So A Token of Love is a dual time story. It's set in Victorian England, 1885 and present day. And it takes place in the city of London. And the Foundling Hospital was the first children's charity hospital in England. And so mothers who could not care for their children would take them there as infants and leave them in the care of the Foundling Hospital. And some of the mothers would leave something to identify their baby in case their situation changed and they might be able to come back and reclaim their child. And they called these items tokens. So a lot of these ladies were very poor and they might only have a thimble or a little cloth heart or a piece of, an old ring or a coin with a hole drilled in it or something that was used to identify their baby as being theirs. So when I saw that image online, I think on Pinterest, and it just really tugged at my heart to think, here's
Mhm.
all the mother had to leave with her baby with the hope that they could be reunited. So that kind of took me into looking into the story. So that's kind of the historical part. There are two sisters who, one ran away as a teenager, had a baby out of wedlock, and was not able to care for the baby girl. So she gave her up to the Foundling Hospital. And 8 years later, she's desperate to try to be reunited because at the age of 8, a lot of these kids were sent out as apprentices to work.
Mhm.
And so she begs her sister, she comes back home and begs her sister to help her get her daughter back. And when the sister goes to the Foundling Hospital with the token to reclaim the baby, who would then be an 8-year-old girl, the matron tells her that the baby died as an infant, and she's just really heartbroken. But when she leaves the matron's office, she meets an old cleaning lady. And the cleaning lady says, "That's not true. The little girl was here until just a week ago. And she's not the first pretty little girl to disappear from the Foundling Hospital."
Oh.
So that sets the sister off to try to find out what's happened to her. And she teams up with an investigative journalist who's looking into disappearing girls from poor areas of London. And they end up kind of searching for the girl and exposing what's happening with that.
Mhm.
And then in the contemporary plot, the heroine is the new director of the Foundling Museum, which tells the history of the Foundling Hospital. That's a real museum in London. And she has a journalist come to work with her who's going to do a documentary film for their gala to try to raise funds because the museum is really short on funds.
Mhm.
And then the journalist digs into the history and finds out about these missing girls. And then the director has to decide, is she going to, risk the museum and expose what really happened in the past, or, what is she going to do about that? So the idea is about truth and justice and standing up for those who can't speak for themselves. That all kind of comes into the plot. So That's how
I
they
love that.
weave together.
I mean, it sounds so fascinating, and I know when you do the 2 time periods, it's complicated because how much do you tell this time, and then you have to not just I mean, you kinda leave that hanging, but as you're also progressing the next storyline, and then what they reveal in the modern day, has it like, how much do you reveal in the past? And so I've written those down before, and it's complicated, but I love that it all is tied together with these tokens. It reminds me of Annie, you know, the original Annie, where they had the piece of the locket
Yeah.
that the parents had to identify her with. And just to think that young women or women, does not have to be young women, were so destitute that they had to surrender their
Mm.
children. I've worked with teen moms for over 20 years,
Mhm.
teen mom support groups. And I know that, you know, just because someone's young doesn't mean their love is any less than any other
Mm.
mother. And to think that out of love, they would surrender it, knowing they have nothing to offer their children. It's just, first of all,
Mm.
tugs on my heart, and
Yeah.
then you have these missing girls element, which is just fascinating, and then the fact that it's a true museum. So I would love to hear about your research and what you discovered as you were working on this book.
Well, when I want to write a story, start with the research first, and that's how I usually find my characters and my plot.
Mhm.
And so I found a lady in England who was a Christian and had a very strong faith, and she stood up for women and girls. Her name was Josephine Butler, and I was just so intrigued by her life. She would write pamphlets and articles and make speeches in public, and the most surprising thing to me was that she faced great opposition, like physical people throwing things at her and trying to keep her quiet. But she was so determined. That just really inspired me. And so I have her appear in the book as a very minor secondary character.
Mhm.
And I used some of her speeches and things that she would say and speak out about as she was trying to help change laws that would protect women and girls. So that was really inspiring to me. And then, of course, just seeing the tokens. And then earlier this year, we got to go to London and visit the Foundling Museum. So that was just a real
That's what I was
treat.
going to ask you next. Literally, that was going to be my next question if you're going to do that.
Yeah. Oh, it was so great. It was amazing. I had written most of the book by then, but just to go there and see it and talk to the staff there and look at, all the tokens they have on display and lots of different items to just tell the stories of some of the different children and some that were reunited and many that were not. And just the whole idea of children that need care and how are we going to take care of children in society that are not able to be with their families. So we were foster adoptive parents also. So that's really a part of my inspiration for the story too, is that I just have a real heart for families and kids and seeing people, be in places where they're well cared for.
Yeah, and I love that, you know, we have I mean, we've adopted 7 children, 6 of them from foster care. So the same type of thing, and any of these
Yeah.
types of stories tug in my heart, but I love the fact that you're able to talk about the past and how things were done, and the modern day, things are done differently, but not really. Like, you know what I mean? There's still whenever there is, um, children that have to be, um, placed by families, whether it's their parents' will or their own. Foster care is often not the parents' desire, but just for the
Mhm.
well-being of the child. There is still loss, and then there is still pain, and then there's still heartache. And I think
Mhm.
so many times we forget about that. We're like, oh, they're in a better place now, or this, you know, whatever it is. But there is still so many emotions tied around that. So
Yes.
as you're going through, and there's, you know, this is in the case of the story from the past, this child is being sought after to trying to figure out what is happening. So was that part, the missing girls, a true part, or was that just something that you worked in for your story?
There were missing girls, and the idea for the historical hero is based on a true journalist who was doing this
Ooh.
type of work. They were not missing from the Foundling Hospital, though. Those 2
Hmm.
things I did tie together. That's
Right, right,
fictional.
right.
But
Yeah.
they were missing out of the East End of London. There were girls that were missing, and there was a big series of articles that an editor, a journalist, who was one of the first investigative journalists who would really go in and dig for the story, interview people, and try to really look for
Wow.
answers. This was his topic, and it caused a huge stir in London. There was like riots after this, and he did some of the same things that my hero does in the story. And I can't tell you exactly what happens because that would spoil it for
I
you.
know, it's like, I'm not that
But
far yet. I gotta find out, but I'm gonna
it's
have to
very
keep reading.
dramatic.
I'm gonna have to keep reading, though.
It's very dramatic what he does and how he is able to change things, somewhat there. So that was fun to weave together. But um,
Yeah.
yeah, so some of that's based in history. And then I did want to bring that element of human trafficking into today because, as
Mhm.
we know, it's still an issue. So I have in the contemporary story, the heroine there, who is the director of the museum, has young volunteers. And one of the teen volunteers is being set up to be trafficked. And so I wove that into the story and they're, able to help her before that happens. But I just wanted to bring that in to show that it's still something happening today. And I have a lot of teen readers. So I'm hoping that they'll see as they read the novel, here's some things to be aware of and to be careful of because it's an online
Mhm.
relationship where the girl is fooled into thinking that this person is just everything she ever wanted. But
Yeah.
of course, that's not the case.
No, and I have 7 daughters, and we talk about this so much, like, so
Yeah.
much, but also there was someone that they were chatting with, and I'm like, "How do you know that that's a real person? That's a teen, look
Yeah.
at the photo." And it was innocent, like, there was no talk that was not innocent, but then I did a search on the phone number, and I'm like, "No, it's Bubba in Mississippi is who you're talking to." And it had because we have monitoring, we were able to
Yes.
catch it before it got crazy, but literally, like, just because someone pushes a photo and like, hey, reaches out, even if it seems innocent, they have motives, and you can actually look up phone numbers, like all this stuff, and got into
Good
my
for
kids. And
you.
so, yeah, I know, but I am so diligent. But there is even where we live near Little Rock, there was a young woman that disappeared, and they found it to friends she had met, and then met at the mall, and it's just
Mm.
really sad to hear these things, but we do need to be aware. And I love that you're doing that. And I love that we have I have some of my teens love to read fiction, and I think this is a perfect one to get
Mhm.
them for gifts. We listen to a lot of audiobooks again. It's like, oh, let's listen to the story. But there's the
Yeah,
historical, there's the contemporary in it, and plus it's based on history, which I love anything that's based on true history, and I cannot wait to find out what the investigative reporter was figuring out. That is so fun. So, okay, so this book is just releasing. Tell
mhm.
us, I know you have written a lot of other books, and I want to make sure that readers know. We mentioned this is your 23rd, so maybe some of your other books that are similar, or that they would like, this sounds fascinating, that they can check out some of those other ones too.
Okay, so my last book that came out last September was called The Legacy of Longdale Manor, and it's also a dual time novel, and it's set in the beautiful Lake District of England, and it has themes about father issues. So the historical
Mm.
heroine's father kind of betrays their family and she has to decide, how she's going to work through that. And then the contemporary heroine has never met her father and goes on a search for her father and ends up in the same big manor house in England that is tied to the story. So that was a fun one to write. And it's up for a Carol Award, so it must be
Oh, that's so
some
exciting.
people must like it.
I will be there. I will also be
Oh,
there at
great.
the ACFW. So, a Carol Award, for those who aren't familiar, is the American Christian Fiction Writers Awards.
Hmm.
And they are once a year. There's a big conference, and then there's a banquet, and those that are up for awards are able to go, and you don't know, like, there's three for each category, and then you get
Hmm.
to see if yours is the one that wins. And so that's super exciting. I'll be cheering for you. I'll be like, go, Gary. So it's so fun. And it's
Yeah.
so great to just get those, to know that, of course we want readers to love our books, but also to know that whoever are the judges for those,
Hmm.
because there's dozens and dozens of dozens books up in each category. So that is
Hmm.
wonderful and exciting to know. So I'm going to be
Yeah.
excited to hear about that.
Thank you. Yeah, the other two are great books. I've read them both and really enjoyed them. So I'm honored just to be a finalist. It's really special. So the last 9 books I've written are all English. So these two, A Token of Love and Longdale Manor, are the dual time ones. Before that, they're just historical romances. But most of them have true events in history. So I really love to
Mhm.
do that. So Across the Blue has the race to be the first to fly across the English Channel and a young woman who wants to be a journalist. And the guy who's building the airplane. So that's really a fun one. And then I have a series, a family series set at a fictional manor house called Highland Hall with a governess in the first book, and the daughter's growing up and going presented to London. The second book and the third book, it's during World War I, and you follow the family through that. So those are a lot of fun. I have one that's kind of a mystery romance one in northern England called Shine Like the Dawn, and so I've been really enjoyed setting stories in England and traveled there 3 times for research. So that's really been fun. I'd love to go more often.
I know!
That's about as
Yeah.
often as I could go. So
I just had a friend, Margaret McSweeney, she has, Kitchen Chat, and she just did a tour of English teas. So she went
oh,
all around England and did different
wow.
teas, and I'm like, "Please, Margaret, please invite me next time." So that would be amazing.
Wouldn't
Yeah,
that be great? Oh, that sounds wonderful.
I love it. So I love that excuse me. I love that you have all these historical elements, but talk about the faith elements because I
Okay.
also know that your books have a very strong faith element, which again, it's just woven into the story so beautifully that the reader learns about God and faith and truth or justice, all these things woven into your story. So let's talk about that aspect when it comes to it.
Yeah, I always, that's really important to me. And so, the challenge is to try to do that in a natural way. And so I usually try to think of, as I'm plotting out the story, what are the conflicts and issues that my characters are going to face? And then what are the different ways that God would help someone to overcome those or to learn the truth about that situation and get through it in the best way that they can. So, um, I just really love weaving that in and letting the Lord kind of lead me and show me how to do it. So we do it in lots of different ways
Hmm.
through other characters, speaking to them, for them just, praying and receiving insight themselves or just experiences that they have. So the faith elements are really important to me, and uh, they come through pretty strong in my stories. I try not to be preachy, of course, but
No, but
uh,
yeah.
but they're it's definitely Christian fiction that has my characters looking to the Bible and the Lord for their answers for the issues that they're facing.
Mhm. And I think there are some books that are by Christian authors, but it's the author's point of view that comes across and they're clean and they're wholesome,
Hmm.
but there's not a strong faith element. But I think I love ones also that I feel like I'm learning and growing spiritually and being challenged in my own faith as you're reading a novel just by seeing the
Hmm.
characters' growth. And it's important to realize like there's people we may never invite or we might invite them to church, but they're
Hmm.
like don't want to go to church or they think like God will strike them dead if they enter the doors of church or
Yeah.
whatever misconceptions people have, but they can open a novel, get swept away
Hmm.
in the story and the characters and they can learn about things. My mom and my grandma became Christians when I was in elementary school, and so really I was raised by my mom was a very young Christian, and so a lot of things that I learned about faith came through fiction. I remember Jeanette Oakes' Love Comes Softly,
Oh.
and I must have read that, I don't even know how many times. That was like one of the first Christian novels. And I that was like such a pivotal part of me understanding faith and understanding God and
Mm.
understanding love and understanding forgiveness and all these types of things through the
Yep.
pages of a novel. So I love that your stories definitely do that.
Yep. That's important to me too, and I really try to weave that in a good and natural way.
Awesome. Okay, so what are you working on now?
Well, I'm working on a new historical romance series. It's called The Lost Treasures of Yorkshire. And it's a story that has 3 books, hopefully. And there's 3 sisters who inherit kind of a crumbling old manor house in the North Yorkshire area of England. And it's going to be set in the early 1900s, Edwardian era.
Mm.
And they've inherited from their great uncle. And there's one stipulation: they must live there for a year. And they have always lived in London, and so this is a big change for them. And of course, there's someone who doesn't want them to live there for a year.
Ooh.
So there's sort of a little bit of a mystery there, and there's definitely a romance and just the fun of uh, tying it also to the oldest sister, who's the main one, kind of the main character in the first book. She is a novelist or wants to be a novelist.
Ooh.
And she loves Charlotte Bronte and the Bronte sisters novels. And so the treasure that these sisters find in the first book is they find a photograph that says on the back that it's the Bronte sisters. But when they take it to the Bronte Museum people there was a small museum even in the early 1900s, they say, no, it's not true. It's not them. So there actually is a real photograph like that. And that's where I got the idea that there's a big debate about, could this really be the Bronte sisters? Because right now there's only paintings of them. There's not
Oh,
any
okay.
photographs because the two of the sisters died in the 1840s and one in the 1850s when photography was very young. And so
Yes.
anyway, it's kind of a fun. It's fun to see this video. I think I saw it on YouTube, and I thought, well, that's a cool idea. So I've kind of followed that, and I'm just
That
a
is so
little bit
funny.
into the story now. So we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, you never know where novelists find our ideas,
Yeah.
Pinterest or YouTube or all these
Yes.
places, or we're there in researching in person.
Yeah.
It is so great. Well, Carrie, these stories sound amazing. And a token
Thanks.
of love, I am enjoying it so much. So for those who are interested in your books, where can they go to find more information about you and all your books?
Well, they can come to my website, which is just my name, carrieturansky.com. And when they come, I have a free short story for them that's called A Keeper of Her Heart. It's set between two of my novels, No Ocean Too Wide and No Journey Too Far. But it'll give you a sample of my writing, even if you haven't read those. And if you do read it, then you might want to read the books that go with it.
I think
Um,
so.
yeah, so those are fun books. Those were set also with true events of a child immigration program where the in England between 1865 and I think 1939, there was more than 100,000 poor and orphan children who were taken from England to Canada, and most were taken as indentured workers, not to be adopted. They went the boys to the farms and
Oh my goodness.
the girls to work as domestics. And so when I heard that, I couldn't believe it. And so I looked into it, and there's an organization of descendants of these children who, grow up to be adults. And you remember Anne of Green Gables, how she
Yes.
was
Yes.
she was a Canadian born orphan and very much looked down on because of that. Well, these are British born either orphans or poor children, maybe from illegitimate families or whatever. And so they were very much looked down on. And so a lot of them, when they grew up, they never told anyone that's how they came to Canada. So even their own families sometimes didn't know. But then, sometimes they did tell. And now there's like descendants who want to know the history and they're looking into it. So I found out about that and I thought, wow. So I interviewed a lot of the people who were the descendants who were finding out the true stories. And I wove them together in a fictional family of 4 siblings, 3 that get sent to Canada, and then an older sister who finds a way to Canada to go after them to try to find them and reunite the family. So that's the first book. And the second book is 10 years later to finish the story and tell everything that happened to them as they became young adults. Because, like foster children, when their indentured contract was up, they had to make their way in the world. And so I wanted to
Yes.
just say what would happen to them when they became of age. And so that was a really fun story to write. So those 2 stories, yeah.
I'm gonna fall down the Carrie Turansky rabbit hole with all these books. They sound amazing.
Yeah, that's
I
a good
love
one
it.
for homeschool kids because
Yes.
they've a lot of homeschooling, co-ops and stuff have used that, like to teach a little bit about history, and because it has a children's point of view. The 12-year-olds are the main characters of that one. Then they get older as they go through the story, but it's a good one you can use with teens.
I love it. Well, thank you for being here. We're going to have all the links in the show notes,
Great.
but I just appreciate you and keep writing. Keep writing. They sound amazing.
Okay. Thank you, Trisha.